Hi there, my name is Max Carlist. I'm Senior Strategist with Start. We're a design agency. We focus on brand, digital and retail design. Got a fantastic panel for you today, but I feel I've got to start with a confession. I don't actually like panels much. I don't know if you feel similar. The reason I'm not always sure about panels is because I find it's a really effective way for people sometimes to hide in plain sight behind over-politeness and platitudes and a sales pitch, perhaps. So I can guarantee you those are things we won't be having in this panel. What we are going to be giving you today is some decent handholds on the future of design. What we want to be giving you is some really useful takeaways on people, projects, things that you can take away and follow up on so that you're going to be smarter than the people who didn't attend this conference today. The way we're going to do that is we're going to have a quick check-in on what design is. Then we're going to take a quick look in the past about where designs come from. And then the majority of this is going to be on the future of design, as the title suggests. Also, this shouldn't just be one-way traffic. I'm inviting you to heckle us. Please heckle us. Free consultation from me to anyone who gives the best heckle of the day. So yeah, please give us your best and we'll give you our best. Fantastic. So we're going to kick off the panel. And we have discussed a few of these in preparation. So if you feel these are really horrible questions and totally unfair, they were pre-warned. To begin with, probably quite straightforward, but I feel it's best if you have a chance to introduce yourselves. And however, I've asked, could you describe your job as if you were talking either to your children or your parents? Perhaps start at the end there.
So my name's Clive Grenier. I run a service design team at Barclays Bank. And that's a really good question. If I'm describing it to my parents, I started life as a product designer. I designed things like SodaStream fizzy drinks machines and Ford car radios. So I tell my mum that, do you remember all that stuff I used to do where I used to find out what was wrong with a car radio or what were the problems with it? In my case, it had 35 buttons when they went digital and no one had any idea what each one was. And then I would create lots of designs and then would create a model and then would go and deliver it and make it for real. Well, I do exactly the same as that. It's just at a bank. And it's nothing to do with physical product anymore, but it's definitely about finding out, designing better solutions, proving and prototyping them, and then delivering them. So that's how I describe it.
Thank you.
Martin Dowson, I'm head of customer labs and design forward at Lloyds Banking Group.
Who?
Yeah, who? I used to be a consultant, and so my mum would always say, I have no idea what you do. And now she says, he's a banker. So I've still got a bit of a problem with explaining to my parents. But I would say to them, I help people understand how humans behave and how they react to the world around them, especially when it's things like services you get from a bank, apps and technology. It's as simple as that. How do humans behave in their lives and how do they react to technology and services that we build?
Cool, thank you.
So, hello everyone, I'm David Dominguez. I am one of the VPs in RBS, in the Design and Engineering Services team. We work as a horizontal team, so we could be working this month on the investment platform, and next month we could be working on a, day-to-day banking application for the Joe in the street. That question I think is a bit loaded, actually. Because, to be honest with you, for the previous years, maybe like 7, 8 years, it has been difficult for me to tell my mom what I was doing, especially because she's a nurse. She was not very much a, how do you call it, a person apt to work with digital products. And recently, as 2 years ago, actually, I gave her an iPad so she could speak to me with FaceTime. And that was the time when I could tell her, actually, look, this is what I do, and what I'm actually doing is making sure that this stuff that I'm just giving you today is going to be easy to use for you and you could just basically understand what it is there. You know, so it's the more kind of like the most on-the-road description, I would say, that I could get to my parents, you know, and I had to resort to a device to be able to explain it to them.
Great, thank you very much. I think that's helped us get a bit of a grasp on what these people are doing in the workplace, but I've always figured to really get the measure of someone, I have one favorite question, which is quite straightforward. What is the coolest thing you've seen in the last 12 months?
Okay. So I bumped into a chap called Neil Harbison in Euston Station. I'd kind of heard of him from some TED Talk things, and I immediately recognised him in Euston Station. It's very hard not to. He's a creative artist from Germany, and you know, I don't know if any of you got those little clip-on lights that you might put to the side of a bed or over your book that have that kind of extendable thing that, because like, he's got one of those on his head. Yeah, it's plugged into his brain. Neil was born with a particular kind of colour blindness that means that he sees the world in grayscale. And so he is a living cyborg. He is walking around with this camera that is looking at the world and taking the colour and the frequency of colour and translating that into a sound frequency that is vibrating in his head. So he hears colour. Yeah, so, you know, I mean, I'd seen this guy in a TED Talk, and I'm like, oh my God, you know, wow. So I sat down and said, you're Neil Harbison? He went, yeah, I get this a lot. So that was the coolest thing I saw in the last 12 months. One of my stakeholders once said to me, we said, what do we think we're going to see in 10 years' time? And he said, human-brain interfaces. And what he meant was, I'm going to see the indicators that exist now. It's not mass market yet, whatever, but the indicators are walking around already. Mm-hmm. So that was cool.
Fantastic.
Shall I begin? So I'm very lucky. Just recently I've started teaching at the Royal College of Art. The Royal College of Art is not just sculptors and fashion designers. It also has a bunch of people called service designers who we are desperate to come and work with us in financial services. And so I could list almost any one of their projects. You know, the kind of projects they've just completed are designing better festival experiences for Bestival, the rock festival, for disabled people, including deaf people. Turns out it's quite, if you're deaf, Rock Festival is quite a good place because it's loud and you can feel it. But one particular project really caught my eye recently, and it was a guy who was working with some prisoners, and they've set up a recording studio and recording label in prison for prisoners to basically become recording stars, musical entrepreneurs. And I just thought, wow, that's designers completely turning a bad situation to a great potential situation. And I like it when design does that.
Great, nice. Nice, David.
So my one actually, which is slightly aligned to what you was mentioning, which is Neuralink. Probably you heard of Neuralink already. It's this Elon Musk company that intends to bridge the gap between, you know, our brains and the technology around us. And okay, all of that is well and good. You know, as you are mentioning, yeah, everybody wants to connect our brains, etc., etc. But the link between this and what I'm just going to say kind of like made the click for me. And I was watching 2 days ago on LinkedIn this video of this girl with these 2 prosthetic arms, picking 2 pieces of glass and putting them into her eyes. You know, and how can that be possible? You know, obviously, because, yeah, there is the interfacing is in place, actually. And to me, that was like, wow, that's cool. Yeah. You know, interestingly enough, I've got a friend who lost part of his leg, you know, a few years back. And, you know, every time that I go and visit him, because as you probably guessed, I am not British, I'm not English, you know, I'm Spanish. And, you know, I go and visit my family there. You know, every time I meet up with him, he's telling me stuff about, yeah, because I got this new prosthetic leg, you know, and I talk to him about it. Hey, what do you think of this stuff? When all of this can happen, and he's like, yeah, let's see when it comes.
He's upgrading all the time, right?
He's upgrading,
he's going through upgrade
exactly.
cycles. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
Cool.
Nice. Well, I think it's only fair to answer questions that I've put to the panel here myself as well. In this case, I would have to choose something called the plantoid. I don't know if you, hand up, anyone have heard of the plantoids? Yes, we've got one hand. Congratulations. almost counts as a heckle when it's just one. So the Plantoid, it's a sculpture of a plant, metallic sculpture. It has a blockchain cryptocurrency account attached to it. You can donate to the Plantoid, which then takes the money, and when it has sufficient funds, it hires artists to recreate more sculptures with cryptocurrencies attached. What they've actually done in this art project based in the States is recreate life. It has creation, reproduction, and death. So it's also the first occasion where a machine is employing a human being that I'm aware of. So hopefully some quite nice inspirational examples for you to take back and freak out your colleagues with. So if we bring it back to the colleagues and also how we connect design with our colleagues. So presumably someone at your organization values design because they've paid you to do it. However, do you find that you're having to sell the value of design at your organization? And so perhaps it's a different storyline that your parents or your children would get about your job. Can you perhaps describe how you sell the value of design internally?
I'll have a go. So it's a very different conversation, I have to say. I would say that if it's an elevator pitch, I'll say, I'll show you what good looks like. Because most people in my particular bank, and I suspect others, are trying to solve sticky problems, things that should be done better, processes that need upgrading, updating, reacting to complaints from processes that have gone wrong. New compliance, new legislation, there's always a lot of stuff to react to. It's a very reactive environment. And I think one of the results of that is that you just fix stuff. You just move along, you push down that bump in the carpet, quite often another bump pops up somewhere else. And one of the things I would say we do that is quite distinctive, our USP in a bank, is defining what good looks like, reminding yourself that what a really great experience, process experience, actually is. So when we're fixing something, we'll also make it really good. And we do that by an added emphasis on this discovery and design, as I would call it, finding out what's really going on. And I promise you, nobody knows what really is going on. Very few people in a bank actually know what customer sees. I don't think that's just my bank. So we really are relentless in our pursuance of visualizing what the experiences really are like, and then helping everybody have ambition to make that better. So I think that's how I explain it.
Oh,
So
thank you.
that's really good. I like that very much.
You can have that.
Thank you. Similar challenges, I agree entirely with the challenges there. The articulation I often have is, what's the problem worth solving for? Everybody who has worked in a large organisation long enough has had that experience of, they said they wanted to do this, and these are the requirements, and therefore that's what we're going to try and build. But everybody has this sickeningly right feeling that it's just not going to work. So design is design in its broadest sense, and we take it outside of the digital world and go back to your origins of product and industrial design, is a fundamentally human-centered, collaborative, multidisciplinary problem-solving mindset, right? And why that is important is because the problems are sticky, because the problems are complex, because you can't just understand the human, you have to understand the system that is the business. And what you want is a bunch of people that are oriented around, I want to solve those problems. I so want to solve those problems that I want the solution to stick around for long enough, right, as well. So we could design awesome stuff that looks brilliant and really cool, costs so much to build, is impractical to keep running. Who have we done any favors for, right? However, old school orientation would have said, we know what we want, here's the requirements, and design is colouring in the pictures and joining up some dots and stuff. And business has had a problem understanding that designers care about outcomes and they care about sustainable outcomes. But actually, if you walk into the RCA and Glasgow School of Art, they all want to have impact on the world, and they understand the role of profit and sustainable delivery in that. And that's the conversation we're trying to have about design is your problem solving. What's worth solving for? Engineering helps you work out how to get it to market quickly, fast, agile, at scale.
Cool. David, have you been left any room to add comments on
was gonna
how you
mention,
sell
actually.
design to colleagues?
You know, I can tell you what I've been telling the other day, actually, to one of the project managers on one project that I am working in. He was just telling me, okay, so we need to deliver this on time, on target, on budget, you know, and I was telling him this. It's gonna sound a little bit adversarial, you know, but, you know, I told him already, look, conflict is good, actually. Conflict brings the best of us, actually.
Yeah.
And that's why we evolved, actually. Anyway, so he was telling me all of that, and I was telling him, look, what is happening in here is that you are worrying about getting the stuff done, and I'm worrying about the quality.
Yeah.
You know, that's what I was telling the guy. And, you know, moving from that adversarial way of speaking, actually, I was also telling him, look, what I'm trying to do here is take all of your, let's say, business wants and try to bridge the gap between the user needs and those business wants, and try to come up with something that is going to try to fit both of them. Sometimes perfectly, well, maybe 0.1% of the time, and 99.99% of the time, more or less there.
Can I just add
That's it,
something
yeah.
that I forgot to say? I really love that, love what both you said, but something that I sometimes have recently started saying that I have to say resonates well with financial services is that actually one of the outputs of design is a de-risking
Yes.
of the solution.
Yes.
I thought that would
Yes.
resonate with you.
Absolutely.
This is not just about making it nicer, it's because you take the risk out of what you're spending your money on investing and
100%.
putting forward,
Great.
and all the effort and all the engineering effort
Yeah.
and everything else. I think de-risk is something we kind of forget
Yeah.
because it's a bit,
Totally.
you know, it's a bit more measurement than the lovely stuff, but I think it's important.
Great.
Yeah.
And building on that, in fact, you mentioned measurement. Is it fair and reasonable and possible to quantify the value of design?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, and we're working on it, right? Yeah, it's
Yeah.
a moving feast, right?
I mean, the metrics of design are tougher for us all, I suspect.
Yeah.
And you know, of course, we all our bosses bow to the great god of Net Promoter Score, and you know that's it. And if you're going to measure it, then that exists, and it's got currency at exact level. So I'm not going to shy away from that. I'm going to make sure that anything I design has a really good Net Promoter Score, but it's not going to increment that score up by 1 or 2%. It's going to do it by 10 or 20%. So I'm going to engage totally with that and get that result. Otherwise, it's not worth having me around, really.
Yeah.
So there's some interesting moves towards can you pull a hypothesis together that having a good engineering capability that can help you move fast at speed, at scale, right? So quickly on that, great agile engineering is not about getting everything faster. It's about your cycles of learning moving faster. So just talking with Robert Eriksson, one of our heads of engineering, about this last night. And it's about cycles faster. And if I can get through those cycles faster, I can learn faster. Having a hypothesis about what might move a dial, and then really understanding what the problem is, making sure you're looking at the right things that are worth solving for, de-risking through the design means that you're putting valuable things into that, and you're learning quickly whether your hypothesis is going well or not. That is totally different from trying to work out right up front, will I make 10 or 15 moves on a point scale of some measurement, and then doing it and then hoping that's what happens, which is old school thinking. So that's kind of quite interesting. We're also looking at engineering is forcing us to look at metrics that are different. So they're saying, what's the value of the work that we're doing in engineering? And they want a customer expression of value. So we're coming up with a customer experience measurement framework, or have done, that tries to break down principles about the experience and then measures you might attach to that. So if I think trust and confidence is important, then as a team they can respond to trust and confidence and say, we have a hypothesis that the work we're going to do is going to move confidence because of clarity of the language in this terms and conditions, or because of simplicity of the process, or because of, which is different for everybody. They attach themselves to that measure, they find a way to measure it, they report back, against the principle of trust and confidence, and that is our measurement framing. That's the value element of engineering's looking at quality.
Cool. I'm going to take that one from you.
Can we make an industry standard out of that,
Yeah,
please?
go on.
We published it with Forrester earlier last year.
You know, it's interesting you made that question, actually, because, I didn't think of that one earlier, you know, but beforehand we were talking about Frog.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, you know, and one of the biggest things that I say a lot recently is we are agents of change. That's what we are. And this change can come in many forms, in many shapes, etc., etc. But to me, it's kind of like the change of, you know, placing the user from that side over here right to the center of the onion, actually. And I mean, that is, as I said, not so much as a business measurable item, but something that is getting us closer to the user.
David mentioned Frog there, which most people may not be familiar with. Because
Sorry for that. Yeah.
we're design geeks, so in various forms. But Frog were involved very early on in seminal work around Apple's design and things like that. And they have recently published a piece on 5 levels of value in design that design offers to a business and over time. And 3 of the short-term leaps are around speed to market, around the extension of products and services that you can offer, and the deepening of loyalty. But they're kind of short-term return scales. The longer one is transformative value, where you really get into totally new areas of value, but based on customers, and then an underlying one around your organizational change. And what they've articulated is our classic business metrics associated with each of those, but they've split it up in a way that you can see that design work would help you with speed to market, increasing loyalty, totally changing the game, engaging your employees, and it's quite nice. It's freely available. I'd go and have a look at it, and I'm borrowing that like mad right now, because it's nice articulation.
Yeah, and I think you got away lightly there. You didn't get a heckle for talking about Frog doing leaps.
I know, I was expecting at least a little giggle.
They're not paying attention. Not paying attention. Good pun. Fantastic. So perhaps it's time to turn to John Mader. So it's time we brought in one of the well-known design gurus, head of MIT Media Lab. He's positioned this model saying design has gone through 3 stages. You have visual design, which has gone into business design, and the future is really computational design. And so what that's describing, for me at least, is a shift for design moving away from just being about art and going more into being about science. So I was going to put it to the panel here. Do you feel computational design is the next phase of design, and what do you think that will mean to people in this room?
Let me start with this one, actually. So that is interesting because, my previous company that I was working in, we involved John Mader, actually, to help transforming the organization. And one thing that became transparent to me is, you know, his capability of getting people, of making people working together. You know, that was the value that I would say this guy really brought in. With regards to this merging AI and the designer, there is one thing that I want to say. So normally they say that 90% of everything is crap and 10% is gold. You know, so I'm gonna go and make a parallelism there. So to me, it feels like in the future, maybe 90%, if we are going in that route, is gonna be bland, and 10%, which is gonna be the human part, is gonna be the really interesting and disrupting bit. Why do I say this? I mean, also Dan Saffer is talking about, you know, his excursions in trying to bring artificial intelligence, you know, into his design work, and feels like, yeah, we are gonna have artificial intelligence. They're gonna help us out. They're gonna remove all of these, menial tasks of moving pixels up and down, and it's gonna free our brains up to go and focus on the actual user and the empathy with the user. And that is that 10% that I'm talking about. The empathy with the user is something that, I have to say, I cannot see artificial intelligence just getting right yet. I don't know if you will get it right, you know, but I'm counting on that. That's what I'm putting, you know, my big coins, actually.
Great, guys. Any thoughts?
So John Mader he's a very inspirational guy, and I love him. I think he's done a lot of great work in placing design inside the technology and wider arena. But he does work at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, so he kind of would say that, wouldn't he? You know, he is of that ilk. And I just feel, why would you want an artificial intelligent designer? I'd much rather have an artificially intelligent code writer do the stuff that is techie, and perhaps you could write a user manual for. Every single place I've worked, engineering or technology people try and write the guide to being a designer as if anyone can do it. And don't get me wrong, we are all part of the design process, actually, and it's one of the things I'm very keen on making everyone understand. Decisions we make at a strategic and a detail level can really impact on how we design and deliver a customer experience. But if we're going to have people who are, you know, really good at it, and people who really care about empathy, and just know some of the processes about going and finding out what's really going on, when people inside an organization might be much more concerned with the operational side and less able to divorce themselves from that and see what's going on, then I think we still want people with emotion, with empathy, with art, actually. And it's art and science together that's exciting, not the two separated. But I just think if you're going to make an artificial anybody, I'd make a coder, not a designer.
So there's a sense in which some things, you know, everybody says everything's changing and then some things haven't changed, right? And some things won't change, they look different, right? So as a product or industrial designer who will have had that element of trying to understand that human beings have got challenges and problems in their lives and I want to solve for that. In order to do that, especially, and this is a skill I think has been somewhat lost, you need to understand the materials that you're working with, the environment, the context, the constraints. So my interpretation of John Mader's piece is that the environment, the materials that I'm working with, the constraints are now computational. They are in the context of artificial intelligence. And so, you know, when we're looking at hiring writers, there's a couple of different things that we're looking at for our content. We're looking at comedy writers. And we're looking at comedy writers because they understand the nature of engagement in conversation between people, not because you're about to see jokey content from Lloyd's on our website. So certainly not going to see comedy scripts, but in coming up with that. But the other thing we're looking for from our content people as well is an ability to understand how that kind of stuff gets coded into artificial intelligence systems and machine learning, because they're going to have to encode their creativity in that. And I think that's the thing to take away from John Mader's thing, which is where we were understanding physical materials, and the raw materials are now computational, so designers need to understand that. But it's always been multidisciplinary, right? It's always been about that. And at the core of it has been this wanting to solve things right for human beings in a sustainable way.
Great. Great. So we've held up John Mader as one example of someone to keep an eye out for. It's an opportunity, though. We said at the beginning we want to offer these people handholds so you can look up to some respected figures who are likely to be the ones shaping the future. Are there other people you want to celebrate, whether they're individuals, institutions, publications? What are the sources that you find most useful for helping to see how design is changing?
So I'll go backwards one, and forwards one. Backwards, I look to Dieter Rams and Charles and Ray Eames, who are no longer, well, Eames are no longer with us, but Dieter Rams is. Really, really interesting to look backwards. I run a team called Design Forward. We design 3 to 10 years in the future, and the first thing I do is I take the team to the archives because there's something in the history of stories. So Dieter Rams, some of his most iconic design is embedded in Braun products, so the calculator. This has influenced Johnny Ive's work at Apple, and in concert, Rams influenced by Eames. And when you look back at these designers' work that was very firmly in product space, but these guys also influenced IBM and the IBM design language for the last 50 years as well. Their influence is absolutely everywhere, and it was about some really fundamental principles around simplicity, around usefulness, around aesthetic, around engagement. And so they're the 10 principles that they have, I think, are worth hanging on to because they're timeless. Going forward, one thing there's a documentary coming out about Dieter Rams' life and his work. It's a kind of one-on-one interview with him, and he is seen in the trailer that I've seen so far. He's seen walking through the streets of London, surrounded by people who are out there on their phones, looking down on their phones, bearing in mind that his work over the last 50 years has fundamentally influenced a lot of the things that have gone into those phones. And he's heard to say that if he had his time again, he wouldn't be a designer. He's somewhat disappointed by the impact that technology has overtaken versus the human agenda of the design that he was doing. And I think that's really worrying. So then when I look forward, I'm looking at what people like Fjord are doing in absorbing, making and doing companies. So Fjord are design, but if you look at Fjord and Us2, they are making stuff and they are seeing the impact of making stuff, and they're trying to combine these two things. And I think it is a harkening back to product and industrial design days, but that's where the future is combining designing and doing, designing and making.
Great, guys. Any other strong influences or inspirations?
Do you want to go?
So there is one person that is not per se a designer as such. Is a sociologist from the MIT as well. That is Dana Boyd. Probably you heard of her already. Which I find really interesting. What she's doing is looking at how all of the technology that is around us is really affecting the way we are socializing, and how the incumbent appearance of the artificial intelligence may also be affecting our relationships. Because at the end of the day, there is this, I think it's called the China box experiment. I can't remember exactly the name. In which you would get a piece of paper when you write a question, and you throw it down the door on a. Sorry, I'm gonna rewind a little bit actually. So if you're in a hotel and you've got a double room with a door in between, and in one side you've got a person, and in the other side you've got something that may be a person, or maybe. Did I call it right? The Chinese experiment, I think. The Chinese box, I think it's called. Sorry. And so if that other thing that is at the other side of the door can maintain a conversation with you through the slit of the door where you're writing questions and answers, and that artificial intelligence is advanced enough, will you know it is an artificial intelligence or not? And that is, I think they are calling it the event
Turing test.
Yeah. Exactly,
like
that's a Turing test.
AI,
Exactly,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
That is the special event when you can say, okay, so what am I talking to? So I think she is a great researcher. She works for Microsoft, and she's observing all of that and postulating. Her last paper was about this fallacy that the industry is putting out there, and I don't wanna look at anybody out there, that actually artificial intelligence is big data and artificial intelligence. No, artificial intelligence is big data branded in a different way, because it is missing what I was mentioning before, and that is, the insight. It has the data, but it doesn't understand the actual data itself. Okay, so I'm going to stop it now. Cool. I'm just going to mention only one person. Cool. I was going to mention Dan Saffer, but I already mentioned him before. Okay.
Cool. So my take on this is that in the 20th century, we celebrated great designers like Dieter Rams, even Johnny Ive, and I love Johnny Ive. We had a business together 15 years ago before he went off and never came back from California. And he remains inspirational to me because he hated technology and wanted to humanize it. He didn't want to have products that were called ZX81s and were only expressed in the size of their hard drives. He wanted to completely take that out of our conversation with technology, which I thought was very inspirational. But for me, this century is about celebrating the users of design, the people who've taken it on and done something. And actually, I think it's quite interesting that the financial services have quite a lot of that. I mean, if you look at things like the development of mobile banking apps by lots and lots of people, nobody asked for it. It was a bit of an experiment. And probably for most of us, we'd agree that more than half our customers would now prefer to bank on their mobile apps, something that was unexpected and probably helped by Johnny Ive in the first place, making these things accessible and usable. And then, right now, my hero one bunch of heroes are the government digital services, who are digitising stuff with great humanity. They make horrible processes like power of attorney possible online with a few clicks. The stress that takes out of an emotional situation is huge. It's not just a nice bit of design. And then back in the financial services sector, Monzo, I don't know if there's anyone from Monzo here, I mean, that app is just beautiful. It just shows what you can do when you throw away all the policies and processes and systems and operations that muck our life up, start from scratch, which is sort of what design tries to do, and design a mobile app that recognizes when you're drunk, or allows you to. I don't know if you've ever used the Drunk app, or part of the Monzo app. I've only seen it. A presentation. But who would have thought, and it's brilliant. It stops you going to a cash point and spending too much money and all that kind of stuff. So I'm actually really pleased to be in a sector that is actually surprisingly innovative with technology in a very human way. Surprise. So my heroes tend to be companies and organisations like governments and new startups and people who are not just being all designery about it, they're actually delivering great new customer experiences.
Great.
So.
Cool, thanks. Also a chance to name drop just any other recommendations of sources for people to follow better design principles. So any magazines, programs, TV shows, anything else that comes to mind, websites that you'd recommend?
Well, so I think there's a lot to be got from the Service Design Network. You don't have to be explicitly about service design in order to get something out of that, because service design is a very all-encompassing part of design discipline. So they're fantastic publications there, and not an expensive membership. GDS is really open, actually. That's the other thing, right? I mean, they publish, they blog, they have their role descriptions of their teams, their methodology is up on the web. If you're a UK citizen, you're paying for this, so damn right. But that's not why they're doing it, because that's how they're doing things. So, definitely look at that.
Okay.
GDS have 10 rules of great design, how to design things well. And the first one is consider user needs. And there's an asterisk after that, and it says, not your needs, the user's needs. But they are very open, which is fantastic. And also the Design Council, which is a UK national body. It created, 10, 15 years ago, a very simple diagram called a double diamond that helps non-designers understand what is actually different about the design process, or what is helpful about the design process, and how you can all participate it, without being an expert at all. And it's mostly about thinking about it before you do it, essentially. But that's always a problem, because everyone wants to deliver tomorrow. So actually having the political and leadership to say, we're going to work out what we're going to build before we build it, is mostly what design's about. Discuss.
That's one thing actually that I want to link between what you just said. You both said about the government design services and also Monzo. Interestingly enough, you mentioned openness. GSD has the blog, but if you notice as well, Monzo made public I think it was the Trello board actually, so you could see where they were going. And that is an interesting component in there. The openness. And they're just telling you, this is what we want to do, and this is where we're going. So I really value that from these two, ones. I would probably say also the UX Mac, not because I put a couple of articles there, but because it's free as well, actually, and you get a lot of people from the industry publishing content.
Okay, fantastic. So maybe at this point we will check in on the future and your mood about the future. So looking ahead, the future of design, are you feeling optimistic or pessimistic?
So I don't think there's any point in believing in a future other than one. in which we rebalance the human, address Dieter Rams's concerns, and double down on designing for humans. And I think we are, my hope is that the robotics, the machine learning, the AI, and the societal changes that we're seeing, the lifting of values as being really important, is going to force corporations, governments and society to design together better. I think we are breeding a new source of talent in caring about being human-centred from a number of disciplines, not just from a course that says design in it. And so I'm very hopeful. My fear would be for companies to allow the technology agenda to drive first and foremost, for efficiency and things like that to drive. We are, as human beings, we will value convenience first. It triggers the brain more, and as long as we understand that and are cognizant of that, and ensure that when we look at the designs that we're coming up with, they don't supercharge and enable that, then I think we can be in a good place.
Yeah, great. Just before you two come in on this, just a reminder to the audience, so please do have questions ready. We'll shortly be going to your questions. Great, if you want to pick up.
I was just thinking, and that was good, that was an interesting thing you said there. I think the future is fragile. I am optimistic. I think the pointers are there.
Yep.
But, and it might be a cultural thing. So I think if we are in a different part of the world, if we're in California over the last 10, 20 years, we've seen a lot of technology and design working very closely together. And it's why we have things like Uber and everyone else. You know, these are brilliant bits of infrastructure, digital architecture and great design. In Europe, I think we have that a lot. In the UK, we have a less healthy intermingling of design and technology. Mm-hmm. And my world is full of agilistas who the only metric is velocity of development speed. And it's back to your fast and quality conversation. I spent 30 years having this conversation. I'm exhausted by it. And we're still having it. You know, Agile is the latest version of somebody saying, oh, we're just going to build it. And I'll say, you know, what do you want, another Google Glasses or what? And how many failures do we need? How many, how much emotion and frustration do citizens and consumers have to express before we realize it needs to be a better balance between design and technology?
Yeah.
How long do we still have? 10 minutes?
We have time for your response, I imagine.
Okay, perfect. That's
unless
good.
you've prepared a monologue.
No, I didn't prepare a monologue, but there is something that is passing through my head, and I'm going to be slightly longer, and that is, recently I've been binge watching Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I watched the whole TV series. I think in the space of like 4 weeks. I mean, it's seven seasons actually, and the more I was watching it, the more I was realizing actually, look, they are running the enterprise like a company that should be run a company should be run like the enterprise, because really, what it is technology is given prominence, but technology is helping you. Yeah. And the important bit in that universe, fictional universe, is that humans try to better themselves. They are not there to make money. They are not there to focus on technology. They are there to improve themselves as humans. And I want to bring that kind of like positivity from the mid-90s, from the TV series, into the potential future that I see there. So I can see, what we spoke about, the artificial intelligence coming in, and I think I mentioned it slightly. Probably that's going to be the opportunity for us as designers and for the rest of the world to focus less on the things that are less meaningful and focus on the actual people and the user needs. And what we really need to, to focus on, and that is ourselves, betterment of ourselves. I mean, technology, as you mentioned, should kind of like come in and help out. I know this sounds very fluffy, but it kind of like leaves me in a good mood, actually.
Cool. So, but it requires the singularity of mission of Star Trek, And the fragility you're talking about is Black Mirror. So if you want to go
there you go.
watch Black Mirror, that's where the
Yes.
fragility is. So my team in Design Forward 3 to 10 years, we use Black Mirror as our hypothesis to look against, which is what are the unintended consequences that we don't see. And that's what we do when we're looking 10 years out, is we're saying, we put those things. What happens if data is more important? What happens if social media takes over? What happens if?
Yeah.
Great. Great. So before we come to questions, I'd just like to drop in a couple of points to raise. One of which is, if you haven't heard of it, the design triangle. It probably doesn't get simpler than this, but it's simply a triangle that says you can do things cheap, you can do them fast, and you can do them good quality. You can only have 2 out of those 3. And it's a really good bit to analyze at the beginning of a project, just to check in everyone's on the same page. And the second thing that I've found constantly very useful is a quote by a biologist, E.O. Wilson, who put beautifully, I think, that our thinking is Paleolithic, our institutions are medieval, but we have the technology of the gods. And the job of design for me is about bringing those 3 worlds together.
Love it.
And that's why my hope for the future is I'm optimistic, but I'm optimistic if we bring in actually more biologists and biomimicry, because nature is actually the best designer of all.
Cool.
Great. At that point, so do we have any questions? Still time to get a heckle in.
Questions, anyone?
Wonder if I've got a spare.
No,
I want to go home now.
that's good.
I think we did good, boys.
Yeah.
All right. Cool. Thank you very, very much for your time. And please, could we have a hand for the panel?
Thank you.